well, I don't know, is somebody here? Is it on all the time? So we walked back around and then looked in the window. So from about 30 feet away, we saw what was unmistakably a man hanging from a girder, and called the cops. I mean, I like to say from 30 feet away, because whenever I say found a body, it's like, oh, you were at the construction site, you bump into him? No, I mean, it was at least 30 feet away, but it was
Okay.
but he was like right under the light bulb, so it was clear what was going on. And so we called the cops, and I was expecting, a police car or two, and what we got was a 4 City of Troy police cars, 2 Oakland County Sheriff's deputies, an ambulance, a fire rescue, and the county coroner.
That's a big day for them.
What?
That's a big day.
It was, and what it turned out was that, that guy, if you have young children who you really hope doesn't live in your neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
This was the guy for his neighborhood, and the parents of the neighborhood found out and formed a posse, and he had no way out because couldn't go home.
Oh.
Yeah, sad story.
Yeah.
Oh no, that's so sad. Well, that won't be in the podcast.
No.
So, hey, Kara, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. You've met Jen before, right?
Yeah, through this way.
This way, all right.
Yes.
Well, I guess something happened that Amy's internet is completely out for the next couple weeks. We do still have a podcast that I'll be posting on Good Friday. That was our Lent and Easter conversation, so that'll be going up on Friday. Which, by the way, happy Holy Week to the two of you. And tonight we're going to be discussing the Love Has No Labels video. I don't know if you all saw it. And so that whole thing is about bias and the biases that we have about people and looking to judge people. And the question for me that comes out of it is, does love have no boundaries? Is love always inclusive? Because that's kind of the message of the video. And then I went to the website, and it really was about bias. The biases that we have about people based on skin color, gender, disability, and sexual orientation, so on and so forth. And so we're going to talk about that. And then in the next podcast, when we hang up and dial back in, we're going to be talking about the guy who was railing on empire and railing on Christians, and for liking things that the Bible says we shouldn't like. So that's going to be an interesting podcast as well. So this one, I know homosexuality is kind of like the big push in the video, if I'm being honest, and I don't want to avoid talking about it, but I don't want it to be necessarily the focus. I have some thoughts on that, but I don't want the conversation to get bogged down in just that area, because I have some thoughts on a lot of what is being considered in the video other than just that. So, and so far in the 4 seasons of the podcast, we have never focused solely on homosexuality, and I'd like to keep that record going, if at all possible, just so that people understand that homosexuality and abortion are not the 2 things that Christians only think about. Do we think about it? Yes. Is it the only thing and most important thing to think about? I won't say it's not important, but I don't necessarily think it needs to have as heavy a focus as people say that it does. Anyhow, so we're going to jump in and start talking about this video. The video from this website called lovehasnolabels.com. Kind of describe it to you. You may, if you're just tuning in, you heard some of the music and the audio from that. And basically the idea is, it starts off with these skeletons behind this video wall, and these skeletons are kissing each other. And so you can't tell anything about them other than that these two skeletons are in love. And then they come out from behind the screen, and you see that it is two women. And then, so it says love has no gender. And then the next one, it's, like it's an interracial couple. So it's love has no race, or love has no color. And then the next one's two little kids dancing, and they come out from behind the screen, and it's one quote-unquote normal girl and one girl with Down syndrome. And so love has no disability. And then you had two guys, you couldn't tell, but you had this family kind of dancing behind the screen, a little kid in the middle, and then they come out, and it's two guys and a little boy. And again, love has no gender again. And then you had people dancing behind the screen again, and they came out, and you see they're from two different religions. It says love has no religion. And so I thought it was a well-done commercial, and I get the point that it is trying to get across. So it's the whole, and if you go to the website, lovehasnolabels.com, you see that the whole thing is about bias. The biases that we have, the judgments that we make, the preconceived notions that we carry about people that we perceive to be different than us because they make different choices than us, lifestyle choices, decisions that we might not make for our own lives, or might not be necessarily comfortable with because we were raised to believe that this or that thing was wrong, whether it be homosexuality, whether it be interracial relationships, whether it be about keeping people from different religions apart. The whole point of this is love has no labels, kind of love has no boundaries, love has no limits. There's one. Two old people were kissing, and they came out. They came out from behind the screen. You show that they're old. It says love has no age. So that was another one as well. And so I found it really compelling. But then when I got alone and got quiet and started thinking about the video and the message of the video, some of it started to break down for me. And so before I talk about how it broke down for me and what my thoughts are on it, I want to get your guys' perspective on this video and this Love Has No Labels movement.
I'll go. Well, I actually avoided watching this video for a long time. I didn't watch it until you actually just sent it to me, Calvin, because I guess I kind of knew what it was going to be trying to say, and I didn't necessarily want to hear it. What I'm really okay with about the video, I think more than about it being about love, is that people are people. And I think that's a really great message that it's showing, is like we're all the same. We're all made from the same person. We're all made of the same stuff. We're all people, and so it is silly to put judgments on people in that way based on whatever their sexual orientation or their skin color or their age or their religion or anything. I'm not comfortable with saying love is love. Because I actually don't think that. I think the Bible is pretty clear about there being 3 different kinds of love, about, there's a difference in the way that I love my husband, and I love my son, and I love my God, and there are absolutely boundaries that exist within those different kinds of love that I would have to relate to. Obviously, I can't love my son the same way I love my husband. That would be illegal. Nobody would question those boundaries, So it's really easy to say no boundaries, but that's not necessarily the case. And I have a really big problem with that song that was playing over it, like the Macklemore song about I can't change if I wanted to. Like, that song makes me so angry because I just feel like all hope for mankind is lost if we all truly believe that we cannot change even if we want to. Like, what a really sad, depressing to believe. I can't change even if I really wanted to. I'm just this way. And I guess the reason I have such a problem with that is because it's the reason that my dad left my mom, is because he was having a couple different affairs, and he sat down with my grandma and she's like, really need to, you're married, you need to commit to your wife and be faithful to her. And he said, well, I am who I am. I can't change who I am. So I've since I've always had a bias against that mentality because of that. Because it's like, of course you can. Maybe that's what you're inclined to do, but of course you can change. Sorry, those are my thoughts.
I will admit, I mean, this isn't really an admission, it's just the way the day went. I didn't know this video existed until, Calvin, you sent it out. And when you sent it out, I was actually at the gym and couldn't get away. So it's playing on my screen, my other screen right now, and I'm about halfway through it. That being said, I really appreciated what Kara said, but I feel like a failure because I don't have well-formed thoughts yet.
Well, you formulate your thoughts, and I'll have Jen talk.
Okay.
My thoughts are, I'm a little bit torn when I watch the video. I think that's probably what they're trying to provoke in people as well. So I don't feel that I'm probably alone in that category. But my thoughts are that we're mixing terms and we're mixing ideas. And what I mean by that is the video wants you to think that if love has none of these limits, therefore everything is right. And I can love somebody and not agree with them. I can love somebody and not believe they're right. And love does transcend, I think, limits of things in our mind in that way. God so loved the world that he gave his son for us, because he gave his son for us not because he believed or agreed in everything that we did, but rather for the very opposite of that, for the very fact that he didn't agree. And he knew that we were wrong and in need of a savior. And so to give the idea that love means that everything goes, I feel like is in direct opposition to the very word that the Bible says. Now, with that being said, I think they also, it's very well done, I will say, because the fact is that nobody is going to really argue with a lot of the arguments. Like, okay, yeah, we're all supposed to think that love has no, doesn't see disabilities, it doesn't see age, it doesn't see race, and then they throw in, the hot card of, sexuality, and that's like, oh, people don't know what to do with that, and so everybody's nodding their head until that one comes up, and they're trying to provoke people to think about that. And the thing is, though, is a lot of those things have, well, not all of them, but for example, the age. Well, love does have an age. Maybe you can love somebody, but like Kara was saying, the different types of love. There are countries in which it is acceptable for an older man to marry a 9-year-old girl, and then that little girl gets killed on their wedding night. So there has to be limits to some degree. So yeah, there's no age, but then what about that? As Kara said with her son, she's not going to love her son the same way she does her husband, and nobody's going to argue with that. So just because we love somebody doesn't mean anything goes, and it doesn't mean that we accept everything without any healthy boundaries and limits. And the thing is most psychologists and most people, if they really thought that through, would probably agree with that. So then what do we do with that message? That's my thoughts on the video.
Now that I've had 3 minutes, I guess, to formulate my thoughts, and I have the exclusive services of an audio editor to make me sound smarter. I guess the phrase that occurs to me as I watch the video is something that we all heard our entire life, and that is opposites attract, which is usually used by a girl who wants to justify the boy she's dating and nobody likes. And as you get older, you realize that that's really not true. Opposites may attract in a very temporary way, but people who are opposite kinds of people don't generally stick together.
That's
And
interesting you say that. My mom used to always say, my mom still says this, opposites attract, but only for a little while.
yes, exactly. That's what and moms are usually right. And so I look at the list of things that showed up in this video and the people that were behind the screen, and I can wholeheartedly sign off on some of these. Like love has no. I didn't even see if love has no nationality was in it. I might have made that up, but that I can understand for the most part. Love has no race. I can completely sign off on. That being said, that is I am a product of the era in which I grew up. And interracial relationships and interracial marriages are a fact of life and have existed as long as I've been alive, and it's a completely normal thing for me. My 72-year-old mother is going to agree in principle, but not in her heart, maybe, and my grandparents would not have agreed at all. Love has no age, like was said just before me. Two people can love each other with a 5, 10, even 15-year age gap, but love is a reflection of things that you have in common, I think, and so is a 75-year-old man going to fall in love with a 20-year-old girl? He may really want to, but not really. It's not going to be love, and I'm a little torn because I said I completely signed off on the love has no race, which becomes a little bit an issue of culture and nationality. Like when I said I had no problem and no barrier at all toward a relationship between a white person and a black person, that largely means people from the same culture, people from North America. I don't know if a person of any race from America could love a African tribes person who doesn't speak English and has no written language. And feel free to edit this out if this is just sounding awful. But yeah, it seems to me that love is going to be heavily dependent on those things you have in common. And I feel like I've started to ramble here, so I'm going to stop.
No, and that's fine. I think I'll address a little bit of what you said there. Like my brother is married to an African woman, but my brother moved to Africa, so he married. I might get this wrong. He might correct me if he listens. A Nigerian woman. I've never met her. That's the problem. Like only my dad got to fly over to represent our family. We have a pretty large family, so we couldn't all fly to Africa for this wedding, and so. He married her, and I think that there is something to what you're saying there, like your question of could someone from North America love someone, an African tribesman? It's still, when my brother is loving someone who there is somewhat of a language barrier and there is somewhat of a cultural barrier, but their cultures, for the most part, are kind of on equal footing. It's not like this woman doesn't know what running water is. It's not like this woman doesn't know, what the internet is. They might not have as much access to it, but it's not the same as my brother going off into a hut in the middle of, the Serengeti or whatever and meeting someone that way, in that place where there would be absolutely no ability to communicate, so to speak. And so I get that thought. I think what I've dealt with the most in terms of bias, going back to the age thing, I've dealt with age and the race thing, and I don't want to skirt around the homosexuality thing, so we'll get to that in a bit. But for me personally, the skin that I have in the game is that I have classically dated interracially. I've been raised primarily around white people. I was in a military culture, raised primarily around white people. There's kind of a melting pot, but most of the other people were white, and so you had this military culture, and we had that in common, and we were well educated, and we had that in common, and so then I went off to college. I went to a school called Rochester College, predominantly white college. Most Christian colleges are. So again, surrounded by white people, and so our culture was that we were from the same culture. And so the way that I speak, if I've called like Barnes and Noble before, because a lot of my focus in college was on race studies, and I remember calling Barnes and Noble and saying, hey, do you have a black a black book section? And the lady corrected me, we have an African American book section, sir. And I was like, oh, well, I'm sorry, do you have an African American book section? And then I finally, I went up there, and she was black and I was black, and we both kind of had this sheepish moment, like, oh, wow. And the thing is, a lot of people think, when I say, when I speak the way that I do, they think that I'm white, that I'm not black enough, that, and that this is all about. But the issue is, when you were talking about the culture thing, I understand that implicitly, and so someone who is black and someone who is white can very much come from the same culture, but what I have dealt with is people not being able to see beyond the race. Oh, he is black, he must be completely and utterly different than we are. I am unwilling to even engage with him because we're only going to get into massive cultural differences. And the fact of the matter is, I might have more in common with a certain white person than that white person might have with their very own neighbor. I've found that to be true in a lot of cases. And I'm not trying to say that I'm the whitest black guy, because I hate having that said about me. That's like the worst thing you can say. Like, oh, Calvin, because you have an education, you somehow transcended your race, you've transcended your culture, you're now no longer black, you're one of the good guys. But that really resonated with me in the video of Love Has No Race, because I've predominantly dated women from a culture that I am familiar with. And that's not to say I've dated black women, but I've dated black women who are more educated and from the same background that I am. They speak eloquently. They know where they're coming from, which is speaking into stereotypes of what black people are like, even as I'm saying this myself. So it's kind of interesting. But the age thing is interesting because in the video they showed two old people coming out and kissing. Love has no age. I'm like, oh, that's so cute. They're an old couple. They've been together for years. Look at that. But if it were, like you said, Kent, if it were a 75-year-old guy trying to be with a 20-year-old guy, we'd all say, well, that's about money, or what does this guy possibly have in common with this 20-year-old girl? Nothing. And care, like you said, you can love your husband one way, but if you loved your son the same way, it would be illegal for a number of reasons beyond age. But we do draw a line. We do have biases that are, I think, correct in some ways, and I think some of those biases are correct when it comes to the issue of homosexuality, and that's hard to say because I have friends who are gay, I have friends who are lesbian, I have friends who are bisexual, and so how do you address this love has no labels thing in a who am I to judge culture? All loves are equal, all loves are the same, and we very, very quickly found out that no. I mean, just in the midst of this conversation, not even talking about homosexuality, that not all loves are equal, not all loves are the same.
I'm sorry, edit that out. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, and I wanted to add to what you said, is it is interesting in the video how everything else they had was safe. What I mean by that is nobody, like you said, it's two old people. They weren't really trying to raise controversy or push that issue. They were trying to show norms that everybody can shake their head to and go, okay, so that then they will do the same with the issues that they want people to now shake their heads to. So I think that honestly that was well played. It was well done in that regards, whoever wrote that and came up with that idea, because people would have went, oh, I don't know about that, if it was the scenario that Ken suggested. And but what's interesting to me in particular about it is, as much as I can kind of protest that we have to have limits with that, as Kara said, as I've already said, and Ken said, my parents were 20 years apart. So I'm not even sitting here saying, oh, it's not okay to have an age difference or whatever, because I came from a family, a very healthy family, in which my parents had a great relationship. They were married to each other for since my mom was 20 to my dad passed away, and they were very much in love and were a great example. But what was interesting is that they related. So for them, it worked. And they kind of had an inside joke that my dad he would act a little younger and she would act a little older, and they'd meet in the middle. But honestly, it worked for them. And so I think that that's where there are even exceptions to what our culture says is okay and acceptable that are still within that acceptable means. And so they might not be your usual. And we can go, oh, okay, that's a little different, but it works. And there isn't any big issue with that, because she was 20 and he was 40. But there are those even farther extremes that you're going to go, okay, yeah, that's wrong. The 75-year-old with maybe, there's the 16-year-old, or there's those laws that we have in place. And so we do clearly, even in a law sense, have boundaries drawn. Actually, to even be less extreme, the 21-year-old guy can't date a 16-year-old girl. Well, they're really not that many years apart. But there's laws that say that that's not okay. And so at what point do we say boundaries are okay versus aren't okay, and love can cover that or it can't? And I think that that's, what's not being dealt with in this video.
Working at Disney World, I obviously had a lot of, I mean, maybe not everybody knows this, but there's a huge homosexual culture at Walt Disney World. That makes sense. Little boys don't want to grow up, Peter Pan syndrome, whatever. There's a lot of reasons why. It's a really theatrical and fun place to be. But I had a lot of dear, dear friends, and me coming from a place where I went to a small Christian college, it was really strange to be surrounded by so many people that were really accepting of alternative lifestyles, including homosexuality. And one question I got asked a lot was, well, how can loving someone be wrong? How can loving someone be wrong? And that question always just made me take pause, because I was like, they're right. Loving someone is never wrong. That can never be wrong. And I had a very long, I had lots of thinking about it, lots of praying about it, lots of discussing with my husband about it, and I did come to that realization that love is not the problem. Love is never the problem. Love is wonderful. Love is great. Love is never ever wrong. We have examples of passionate love between, I don't mean physical, I mean passionate, soul connecting love between two men, Jonathan and David in the Bible. Having that intense love for someone of the same sex is not wrong at all. It's the boundaries that are the issue. And ultimately it's sex, because homosexuality has sexuality right in it. Sex is the problem. Love is not the problem. Love is great. It's the taking of that love and I guess misinterpreting it, if you will, which is why a grown 40-year-old man in whatever country that this is acceptable would marry a 9-year-old girl and say, I have strong feelings of love and this is acceptable for me to do. It's a misunderstanding of what you're feeling is my feeling on it. So is love wrong? Never. No, love is great, but it can definitely be misinterpreted and used in bad ways.
One thing I think was, well, okay, I'll say this. Calvin and I had a conversation about a completely different topic last week, in which the subject of polygamy came up briefly, and how that was the next big taboo in America that popular culture is going to challenge. And and the video's been playing again, it's been playing silently, but as I've been watching it again, I'm imagining the video with one extra slide, and that is 3 skeletons, all, I don't know, appearing to love each other at the same time, and Bill Paxton comes out with his 2 wives from behind the screen, and if the text had said love has no number, it would have ruined the video, because all of the things. I think the video is a reflection of those things which aren't particularly controversial in mainstream society anymore. And if they had tried to push the boundary that much further, I think a lot of people would have recoiled and hey, not cool. And I think it's just a reflection of where we're at.
I found it, in the video, and they used that Macklemore song, "Same Love," which, if I were to even address the lyrics of that song, I'd say it's not the same love. Not all love is the same. We know this. Kara started off saying that not all loves are the same, right? Not all equal. They are not all on the same footing, and then also that term is just tossed around. It's very easy to say, what's wrong with love? It's like a lot of people will say, Kara, like you said, there's nothing wrong with love, but you're misusing that word. Like, he's like, I do not think that word thinks what you think it means. That kind of thing. I think you're using that word incorrectly, and nobody wants to hear that, and nobody wants to say it, because to say it means that you hate someone, right? If I say that what you say is love, then, like, that's not love. If you want to, we're getting to that point where, why can't three people love each other? And originally, if we go to just looking at homosexuality, that was kind of the argument. Well, what happens if three people love each other? And the refrain was, well, nobody's saying that. We're not talking about that. We're talking about two people loving each other. Why is that wrong? And so there's that bias of it being two people, even whether it's gay or straight, right? And so now you actually do have this happening, where you have 3, 4 people. Actually, I actually saw a story. It was 3 gay guys who all got married to each other, and so it's now 3 people. And it was pushed as this beautiful, beautiful story. And so that's now the next thing. Again, with Big Love on HBO, as people are curious about it. Sister Wives, people are curious about it. And so that is, whether people said, oh, that's not what we're talking about or not, it is becoming the next thing. And Kent, like you said, that would have ruined the video if that had happened, because it's too soon. But 10 years from now, that might not be an issue. They could redo this video and add that extra slide and say, love has no number. And soon they're going to say, love has no species. But nobody's talking about that, right? Why can't I marry my dog? Why can't I marry my pet snake or my ferret? I don't know. But, well, that's just ridiculous, Calvin. Well, that's what we said about, polygamy. That's what we said about homosexuality. But now those things are normative, right? They're becoming normative anyway. At the end of that song, they quote 1 Corinthians, which is probably the most heavily quoted, chapter and verse at any wedding, right? 1 Corinthians 13. And so you've got this video of all these people coming out, and things, certain things that, just one thing actually in Scripture that the Bible says is wrong. Everything else the Bible's okay with, but everything else in that video, that one thing, homosexuality, the Bible does say is wrong, and people can go round and round about interpretation on that. It's very, very difficult to make the Bible not say what it says on that particular topic. I've heard both sides of the argument. Both sides are very, very compelling. I come down on one side of it, but they use this verse in that song. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4, love is patient, love is kind. They kept saying that over and over and over again. But if you go further into that verse, and nobody wants to do that, nobody's going to go further than this in secular culture. And it's interesting. I'll read this here in a second, but before I do, Ravi Zacharias, this just came through on my Twitter, interestingly enough, and it fits. He says secularization is the process by which religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations have lost their social significance. And I love that, because love is patient, love is kind, is about as far as the secular culture is willing to go on this. If they went through the rest, like, it does not envy, it does not boast. That's what our entire culture is based on. It's not arrogant, it's not rude. That's what our entire culture is based on. It does not insist its own way. That's what our entire culture is based on. It's not. Yeah, it's not irritable or resent. Yeah, the song is about having my own way. I want to love how I want to love. I want to have my own way. I want to eat cookies for dinner. That's what I want, Mom. And so, I mean, that's kind of what it's about. But nobody goes the full breadth of this. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Nobody's asking the question of what is the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. We live in a very, hey, when you're not feeling love anymore, bounce, get out of it. So this isn't about love for people. Love is a great word that everybody agrees with, but nobody thinks about what is the definition of that. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. And so when I watch a video like this, most of it, again, Kent, like you said, most of it resonates with me. Most of it I sign off on. I have my biases about certain things, the age thing, the cultural thing I have biases about, and obviously, what Scripture calls wrong and I can't sign off on. I cannot sign off on it. But at the same time, there are things in my life that that I do and participate in that the Bible doesn't sign off on, and we're going to talk about that next week in next week's podcast, where we're talking about cultural engagement and Christians loving and saying certain things are cool and okay to engage in. That if Jesus were hanging out with us, would be like, no. So it's just it's really interesting for me, and it puts me in a tight space socially and culturally. But there are certain things I can't budge on. I can't budge on, unfortunately, as much as I want to, and as much as I fail in other areas of my life. There are certain things where I'm just like, I can't go there with you. I want to, but I can't go there with you.
I just wanted to say to that too. I think that, first of all, Kara, I love your analogy as well about Jonathan and David, because I think that that's a great, strong argument I've even used before, is it's not about love, it's about how you choose to love them. But what's interesting for me, and what is kind of brings this home for me, is that my older brother is in a homosexual lifestyle, and he has been for years, and he has somebody that he loves, and they do life together. And so, there's part of culture, people that would say that I should be cheering on this video, and there's part of me who wants to, because I love him, and then there's the other part that this in the Bible, and it says it's wrong. And what I think is so interesting, and as much as they are trying to make everybody accept it, and they're trying to say, you are judging me, or you're offending me because you're not accepting me, that message itself is offensive. And what I mean by that is, how dare you say that I don't love my brother? That's what that's saying. That if I don't agree with everything he does, that therefore I somehow love him less, or don't love him at all, or don't accept him. So I think that the other side of that, nobody wants to talk about, nobody wants to deal with, right? But if you're saying that if I don't, love you, or say what you're doing is okay, or whatever, that means I don't love you, well, how dare you judge me that? And there's that side of the coin, and I don't know if that's even relevant to this video here, but the message is, if you don't essentially think that love is this, and that you yourself don't love. And I think that in order for somebody to say that strongly, they have to be okay to sit with the other side of that, to say that the reverse is true then. And there is no way that I don't love the people in my life that are not doing everything perfect, nor do I try to judge everything they do, because I don't want to play God, but also because I'm a sinner, and I think that we have a tendency in our culture to focus on this or that sin or whatever, but I am a sinner, and I am the same at the foot of the cross as my brother is. We are both saved by grace, and at the end of the day, Christ died for him just the same as he died for me, no matter if my sin is as obvious as his or on the human scale as big as his, but God doesn't judge sin on a scale. He says if you sin once, you are worthy of hell, but I made you worthy of heaven. And I think that that's where the message gets lost, and Christianity doesn't get its voice out there, that God's love, if we really want to talk about love, God is love. And it's only his love that makes it, that is big enough to transcend no matter what your sin is.
All right, I think we'll end there. One thing I found ironic, though, about all this is for this particular, and I don't want to say this because it's going to sound like super rude and wrong and homophobic and all that, whatever. They quote 1 Corinthians, love is patient, love is kind. This is the same man writing this who says that homosexuality is wrong and absolutely sinful. So it's like, so you're cherry picking here. But again, they're stopping at love is patient and kind anyway. So, but we'll stop there. I think it was good. It didn't go too much into that particular topic, but just enough, I think. So I'll call back in. Let's take a minute break or so to grab water or whatever, and I'll call back in just a sec.